Thank you so much for the invitation to come and share some of our experiences. And this will be a flyover of everything we do, because of course in a city when we're talking about climate change, and particularly I think my focus is how does architecture intervene, how do architects support climate work. We are doing a lot of things, and you cannot do simply one thing. So I'll try to give you a brief overview of some of our very many initiatives. But for me, all of it starts with this picture. It's a picture from our newest water management courtyard. We opened it this summer, and I think it really represents what we're trying to do in Copenhagen. It's a very rundown, poor neighborhood where we, together with the inhabitants, have made this climate courtyard, gathering all of the water using from the rooftops, using circular materials for the build. And of course, this links back to one of the projects or the presentations we heard about earlier today about the urban heat island effect and the increased water also in our cities. So yes, it's hot also in Copenhagen. So hot that the kids are in the water, splashing about. And I think that's central, that everything that we're trying to do, we are, of course, looking to reduce our CO2 and our impact on the planet, but we're trying to do it while increasing the livability and the quality of life for everyone in the city. Just a few facts for those of you who have not been to Copenhagen. The city geographically, the municipality where I'm employed, is geographically within this small red line, maybe you can see it. So a smaller geographical area, but within the region we're about the same size as Vienna. And usually we also count the Copenhagen region as the southern part of Sweden, since we have a bridge connecting, so that's about 3.9 million people. And in other numbers, we are relatively comparable to your situation. And we are also a very fast-growing city. We saw earlier today the numbers from Vienna, about 13%. The demographic increase in Copenhagen is 15%. And this was a little bit lower last year due to COVID, 5,777 more Copenhageners. But we are actually expecting that number to even out. And of course, as a city, this is an exciting opportunity. It's an opportunity for growth. It's very expensive in terms of providing public services, schools, daycare, infrastructure, and so on. But I think the changes in the demographic patterns in Copenhagen say something about the city and the quality of life, because 8 out of 10 of the new inhabitants are children. It's because people are staying in the city, they're having their babies there, rather than moving to the suburbs. And that's very much been due to a policy from the mid-90s trying to keep the families, provide suitable housing situations and increase the livability, better schools, green networks, bicycle lanes, and so on. And so much that we are even almost strangled in our own success in terms of providing for these children now. But this young demographic growing city, of course, needs development areas. And the way we are trying to deal with this as a city is to plan in a 12-year plan, firstly, the red areas on this map, secondly, the pink and orange areas, to try to manage our urban development in certain areas so that we can keep up with the services as the city is growing. And like so many other places, there's a great demand for cheap, affordable, high-quality urban housing. And the policy of Copenhagen, the success of Copenhagen, for many years during the period from the mid-90s, was to provide housing that was adequate for families. So the standard apartment size in Copenhagen was 95 square meters. And we're seeing now that the demographic patterns have changed, but we're also seeing a push towards a more sustainable way of living smaller, sharing more. And that means that today we have a new policy of half of our apartments being down to 50 square meters, using resources in a completely different way. And we don't know what that will mean for our demographics. Will that actually cause people to move out? But we do see that there is this push to live smarter, to use fewer resources within our housing stock. And in terms of the financial development, we have the opportunity in Copenhagen to ask for 25% affordable housing, social housing, within all of the new developments. That's probably going to be raised to 33% within the next year by national law. And I think that there's a very interesting link here, because I took a few screenshots from newspapers last week, because we have a general election coming up in 12 days. And everyone is talking about Vienna. You are really the talk of the town. So I've been looking very closely at the IBA catalog and do plan to bring my politicians next year, because this is really a point where the knowledge sharing between the cities. Today we're talking about climate change, but there's so many other topics that we need to learn from you. So thank you for leading that way, and we're excited to learn more about that. But what I'd like to share is maybe our climate strategy. As mentioned, Copenhagen has the ambition of being carbon neutral in only 4 years, in 2025. And we're doing that across a number of sectors. I'll talk about them more. But generally, we are talking about these 4 categories: energy consumption, energy production, mobility, and city administration. And architecture and planning spans across all of these. I'll try to show you some examples. And I think it's interesting right now at this moment in the aftermath and last hours of COP26 that carbon neutrality in 2025 was Copenhagen's pledge when we hosted the COP15 in 2009 in Copenhagen. That is the decision time when our politicians said, we have this international conference, the world is looking, we have to commit. So I think there can come something out of these big international summits, and we have been trying for the last years to live up with that and then share the policies with the rest of the world. And as a municipality, of course, we're also working within the larger legislative barriers and possibilities, so within the national legislation and within the EU legislation. But we're actually trying to be more nimble and more ambitious than both of these. And as a municipality, we do have some leverage as the capital of the country. We are both an administrator. We're the largest employer in the country. We own quite a bit of properties. We build a lot. We spend a lot of money in our consumption, in our architecture, in our planning. We also provide the services, the water, the heating. We treat the sewage. We treat the garbage in the city. We can control that. We can set standards for it. And we also have the municipal administration that approves buildings and approves local area plans. And we're using a wide spectrum of all of these tools across each other in a synergy to achieve these goals of carbon neutrality. So we're really working, or trying to work across different sectors at the same time, both top down, bottom up, trying to make this happen. And if we look at the last years, what has the success been? So if we use 2009 as sort of the starting year when we elected the policy, by 2018, bi-yearly, we do a report, and that's why I don't have the 2021 numbers with me. We've dropped by almost 65%. So we're not quite there, and we only have 4 years left. It's not all good. So if we look at what is left to do for us to be climate neutral, and I must say that at this point we are only looking within the city. We are discussing now donut economies, to be more responsible for what is brought into the city, the production coming into the city. And that is probably the next step for the city to elect a donut economy inspired by others. So I have to give you these numbers with some limitations. But when we look at the 4 areas that we are working with to reduce, we actually still are not there in terms of the decisions we have already made and put budget to. So we're still lacking 430,000 tons. So over the next 4 years, our politicians have to make even higher ambitions, set more standards than the ones I will be sharing with you today to meet the final goal of these 430,000 tons. Will we make that mark? Well, I hope so. But I think having the ambition has been such a strong driver across the entire municipality and the industry, the private industries that we're working with, that even if we don't make it completely, the transformation and the statement has been such an enormous driver that I'm very pleased still. So for the next 4 years, we're looking, so what can we do across a number of initiatives? I won't go through all of them today. Some of them are very, very technical, but I'll try to focus on some of them that touch the architectural world and touch our physical planning. And the main initiatives of this scheme are set across these 4 different categories. So energy production, consumption, mobility, and city administration. But whatever we do, it has to contribute to quality of life. It has to raise the quality of the urban spaces, of the livability in the city, of the mobility, and fit into all of the other strategies that go along in the city. So we have to benchmark every time we do a new strategy in the city, a new policy, a new development plan, a new local area plan. We have to benchmark it against the climate plan and make sure that we are contributing. So, looking into a few of these initiatives, our energy consumption in the city is really on its way. It's actually not the one where we are using the most part of our effort or winning the most. And that's because so much has been done already from the 90s and onward. All of the city has really been transformed. For instance, in the municipality, all of our buildings, almost 3,000 buildings, are controlled centrally in a computer that can turn on the heating and make sure no water is wasted during the weekend and so on. There's been a lot of initiatives already put into this, and it's very difficult for us to gain a lot more here. In terms of energy production, we are investing in solar power, we're investing in windmill power outside the city. But we are also investing in the heat systems of the city. I'll show you a few examples where architecture is helping us. And this is something where we can actually gain a lot of CO2 in the coming years. So this is a very big effort for us. And since the beginning of the 90s, I've noticed right after lunch, there was a big discussion about the central heating, the district heating in Vienna, and how I think it was 40% of the city that was connected to district heating. In Copenhagen, it is 98%. That is a really powerful number in terms of being able to make the switch. So of course, in the beginning, it was more black energy. And now it is all green energy. Because having this central system means that we can put the solar energy and the windmill power, the wood burning, the green pellets into the system and really make this transformation. So that has to do with the legislation. But energy is something, you know, we can feel it if it's too hot or if it's too cold, but it's very difficult to communicate to our citizens. They can feel if there's a draft, if the window's leaking. But we try to use the architecture of the city to tell the story of the improvements we're doing. So this is our brand new wood-burning pellet energy plant. It's built by Gottlieb Paludan Architects. And if you go a little bit closer to it, it has this wonderful, beautiful facade of mysteriously hanging wooden beams. And there's a visitor center at the plant. And it's really a way to communicate to the citizens that the heat that is inside their radiators is green. It comes from wood burning. Another, oh, I'm sorry, there's a little bit of Danish here, I'll challenge you. It says the city energy and waste. Another of our energy plants is designed by Bjarke Ingels Group, and Copenhagen is very flat. We don't have the Alps. So this is our ski slope on top of a waste-to-energy plant. So all of the household garbage that is collected, when everyone throws out their banana peel or some paper, that's collected and incinerated here, and the excess heat goes back into the heating system. And on top of that, there's a ski slope. There's the world's longest rappelling mountain on the side, and there's a biodiversity park with 400 different species. And this might seem a little silly, but again, it's the symbol used through architecture of telling the story to the citizens of why it matters to collect the waste. Initially, it was the idea of the architect that every time we saved a ton of CO2, there would come a little poof, and a ring of smoke would come out of the chimney on the top to celebrate that fact. That didn't happen. It was very difficult technically. But it has really become a powerful symbol. And this is how we're starting to use the architecture of the city to tell the story, even of these invisible systems that usually are underground, but to communicate them, to tell about the importance, because of course they represent enormous investments for us as a city. So I know it's not quite the Alps, but if you do come to Copenhagen, come and ski on our ski slope. It's really fun, it's very fast, it's this like green plastic material. Another way that we're contributing to the energy production is through looking at all of the different options within our city. So we often talk about the roofs of Copenhagen as the fifth facade of the city. And Copenhagen is typically characterized by having red brick roofs and then some black roofs in the industrial areas. And we've been working with Henning Larsen Architects to develop, and it's a little bit difficult to see in this photo, but it's actually a red solar panel. And it's a red solar panel that can click into the existing module of our traditional brick, so that we keep the color, the architectural heritage as much as possible while contributing and having our facades, our roofs contribute to the energy of the city. And similarly with this new school, also by Henning Larsen Architects, with a solar panel facade. So how can we use every opportunity in the city to integrate energy production as a design method? One of the really difficult areas that we have to work with in order to bring down the CO2 is the mobility of the city. Because the infrastructure investments we've made in the district heating system isn't really visible. You just, maybe as an inhabitant, get the feeling that you have a more comfortable indoor climate. Maybe you have a lower energy bill. But it doesn't really affect you. But changing the mobility of a city, that you can no longer take your car directly to work, or you have to use the bus in another way, that is very difficult. There's always an uproar whenever we do something with parking in a city. So the really big effect of what we have to do, and this is the sort of 30% of the CO2 that we're working with, is actually related to mobility and primarily to car traffic. So a third of this 30%, so 10%, is state government roads, highways going through the city. We can't do anything about them. But the rest of the municipal roads, we can actually start to change, and we are starting to. And just a little background. Copenhagen is built along what we call the finger plan. It was developed after the Second World War, and it has the city center in the middle, and then all of the S trains, here we were inspired by Germany, the S trains going out into the suburbs, into this region, which is about the size of Vienna. And that's very much the plan that we've been developing ever since. So this idea of the finger based along public transit, and then with green corridors in between coming right into the city center. And the finger was sort of extended into an arm in 2000 when we connected to Sweden via the Öresund Bridge. You might have even seen the television series about this bridge. And really started to become a region instead, but still looking at the sustainable infrastructure, the train going over, and now we're even discussing connecting the metro over to Sweden as well. And so we have the finger plan, and from 2000 when we built the bridge, we also have a new metro, and that is really the backbone. And this is why I've told the story. It's really the backbone of now our urban development and this transformation that we're beginning to start with the car ownership and the parking in the city, because we have the public infrastructure of the metro in place. So now we have 4 lines, a circle line, 39 stations. It is the biggest construction project in 400 years in the city. And it's completely changed our city. This is my town hall. It's changed the way we think about the city, and it's really been a fantastic opportunity to explore the architecture and to change the way we think about moving in the city. And that enormous investment has been the basis for then starting to talk about a shift in mobile split, a shift in the transport in the city. So if we look at the CO2 emissions, all of the yellow on this map is from private cars on this diagram. And as you can see, it's gone a little bit down. We don't have that many electric cars in Copenhagen. We could have many more. But we've not really been successful in changing this. And if we look at the development in trips over the last decade, mind you, the dotted line is during COVID. If we look at the development in car trips over the last decade, you can see also that the car trips are going a little bit down. We have quite a rise in public transit, but we have been so challenged by COVID. I don't know if you've had the same examples or experiences here, but our metro is now, from being a booming success, I took your metro today and it actually seemed okay, but our metro is empty. And this is really, really a problem, that our citizens don't trust public transit following the COVID crisis. And it might challenge our ambition in moving more into public transit. So this is something that we're monitoring very carefully and trying to see what can we do to keep this up. But as a city, how can we work with the mobility? Well, we've transferred all of our own vehicles into electric. So the buses, we have harbor buses, boats, all of the cars that we use in the roads department, but also the nurses and so on. All of this is electric. We are rolling out systems for electric cars in the city, but not fast enough. And in Copenhagen, in Denmark, we cannot provide this service as a municipality. We have to let the private companies come and build it. We're not allowed to by national law. So that's one of our challenges, that we're actually not rolling out the system fast enough for the demand. So the demand from people buying electric cars is higher than what we can deliver as a city because the private companies are not supporting us. So, or making this conversion fast enough. So out of 126,000 parking places in Copenhagen, there are 1,300 charging stations for electric cars. That's 0.6%. That's nothing. So this is really one of the challenges that we're looking into. What we're also discussing now is inspired by the city of Ghent, to look at traffic islands, to look at how can we actually keep the traffic, the car traffic, on major arteries and then close areas, the neighborhoods in the city for car traffic, to create both, of course, lower CO2 levels, less noise, less pollution, while we are in this transition towards electric cars. Maybe it will change once we come into a full electric. But this is the ambition, to start to close off the city, very inspired by Ghent. And to start this dialogue with our citizens, this summer we made the experiment in our medieval city center to close 5 spaces. And now the politicians have elected that the city center will be the first of these car-free zones. So we're making the plan right now and then electing it, hopefully, in 2022. And then from late 2022, the city center will be closed for car traffic, except, of course, if you are disabled or have to do deliveries in this area. But the way we did this to have a dialogue with the city was to use experimentation and one-to-one projects. So taking out the cars in certain spaces, putting in 350 new trees, putting in benches, having a lot of conversations with the cultural institutions in the city. This is right up against the cathedral. They came out, it was during COVID, so they came out and did services on the square. The Philharmonics, the Fashion Institute, really trying to say, when we have these new spaces, what would we like to do with them instead? And since then, now this was a temporary experiment during 4 months. All of the trees and all of the benches have been relocated to other places in the city and planted in our parks. And now the politicians hopefully will say yes in 3 months to make this permanent, and then we will have the first sort of car-free city center in Copenhagen. But the basis of that is, of course, that we have a very thriving bicycling culture. And that's not always been the case. Copenhagen, the car ownership was actually going up after the Second World War. But we were saved by a global crisis, the oil crisis in the 70s. And suddenly we had car-free Sundays, and Copenhageners started bicycling again. So we were on the route to becoming extremely car-dominated. But you might say that the benefit of that crisis was to start to think differently. And today, we have more than 400 kilometers of cycle lanes everywhere in the city. And we have a mobile split of over 25% cycling. And if we look at the individual trips, it's actually more than 50% during a day, because people are combining cycling with other modes of transport, so cycling to public transit and so on. And this has really been an important step for us, of course, in terms of bringing the CO2 levels down, but also having the infrastructure. So during COVID, we saw very many cities instantly making new plans for bicycle lanes. Paris, Washington, D.C., taking out car lanes and providing cycling infrastructure. We did the investigations. So we looked at where do we need to widen the bike lanes, where do we need to take some space either from the sidewalk or from the cars, now that people were not using public transit anymore. But we found that our system was actually geared already. It was robust enough. And so actually that small investment, relatively small investment of the bicycle lanes compared to other modes of transport in this turbulent, critical time actually proved to be a very resilient infrastructure within the city. And what we found is that the Copenhagen design, which has this consistency of a sidewalk, a bicycle lane, a parked car, and then the car lane, with a little curb difference, is actually what we think is the success behind this. Because we can see in the streets that when we put in this bicycle lane with the raised curb, there are 20% more people cycling in this road. And it's particularly children and elderly people that feel more safe and use the streets. So prioritizing the safety is in some way the backbone to this. And when you have a cycling infrastructure to this level, you have to treat it in terms of infrastructure, just as you would treat car planning or highway planning in the city. So we have a bicycling priority plan with every budget that looks at where do we need to invest, what are the new cycling bridges, what are the implementations that we have to do. And we do that a lot based on the planning and the data that is provided by the citizens. So a lot of app-based monitoring of citizens telling us where would they like cycle lanes, where's the hole in the lane, where's the difficult crossing, and we really use that smart city data as part of our planning. And even though Copenhagen is a little bit more northern than Vienna, we do see the Copenhagen cycle lanes working. And this is due to a very small thing. I didn't bring the picture, but it's due to someone 15 years ago asking the snow shovel company if they could produce one that was fit, not wide enough, for a cycle lane. And that wasn't a product that existed 15 years ago. So they made it for us, and today the cycle lanes are cleared first. So first we clear the cycle lane, then we clear the sidewalk, and then last the car. And that's a very clear signal to our inhabitants about the priority, you could say the food pyramid, the triangle of mobility in the city. And it also says something about, in a city, that you have to think about all the different aspects, both of the maintenance, the running of a city, clearing the sidewalk from snow, as well as the physical implementation, the planning, the building of the cycle lanes, together with the culture. So, yes, we cycle in the winter because the snow is clear. And like many places, once you cycle, you have to park somewhere. And our biggest new investments have to do with cycle parking. So this is the biggest station, Nørreport station in Denmark, has 400,000 users every day. And it's shaped by Kobe architects according to the movement patterns of people. So like mice over a kitchen floor, if you imagine there's flour on the kitchen floor, looking at where the mice are moving. This is how they've carved out areas both for bicycle parking, but also the entrances to the station. And they've taken then the bike parking areas and sunk them into the pavement. And that is both to visually have a more attractive area where you can look out across the parked bicycles, but also to retain water. So if we have a flood, we can double program these areas to hold a lot of rainwater in the city. And another strategy, same architect Kobe by our university, where they've done the reverse, you could say. They've raised the public space and put the bicycle parking under. So bicycle parking is really a big point of investment for us in these years. But I think the most significant investment in terms of moving people from cars or buses even, or public transit into bicycles and walking, which don't submit any CO2 at all, is the building of our harbor ring. It is a 13-kilometer long connection all around the south part of the harbor that we're now planning to sort of flip and duplicate to the north, with 11 harbor bridges. all around, connecting new neighborhoods and creating the opportunity for people to live and work and move much faster across the water. And in a harbor city like ours, having that transparency is really important. And in the city, we have 81 bridges. 11 of them are along this harbor. And we've asked some of the best architects, or artists in this case, Olafur Eliasson, to come and to help to design them, to have these spectacular experiences of moving across the water. So Copenhagen has done a lot of investment in the cycling infrastructure, but we have to do even more. And that is the backbone of being able to start to shift the mobility and shift the CO2. You can experience a little bit of that next year when we are hosting the Grand Départ of the Tour de France, something that we're very excited about. And I think for us, we are also building a lot of legacy infrastructure for this year, which will be part of the celebration of the tour. In terms of the city administration initiatives, that's something that sounds really, really boring, right? Very gray. But if you have the buying power of spending 28 billion kroner a year, and what's that in euro? That's about 3 billion euro. That's a lot of money. And if we can use that in terms of really using our money in the right way and asking for green accounts when we buy and when we build, that has a lot of power. So we're trying to, with all of the city initiatives in terms of our administration, our finances, our policies, we're gaining CO2 on these as well. And one of the very visible examples is on our streets. So we have a policy called Circular Copenhagen, and it runs to 2024, where we have to reduce 70% of our waste, not only from households, but also from industry. So that also means the building industry waste, all of the materials, the soil, everything that we're working with. And that is something that is affecting our industry a lot, talking about circular building materials, building to much lower CO2 impact, building in wood, talking about the electrification of building machines. We have a big collaboration with Oslo City Municipality where we're buying electric building machines together. But what the Copenhageners will also experience is that we're building 750 recycling stations all around the city to collect this waste, to nudge them. We're doing a lot of programs in the schools with app-based things, competitions. And that is dramatically changing the face of the city. And that's not always popular. We had a design competition last year, won by C.F. Møller Architects, who designed these new sort of recycling stations, and they're shaped like mini houses, is the sort of design code. And there's a lot of opposition from the citizens because no one wants this outside their window. I can understand that. It's a big thing. But we have the political ambition and the responsibility to do more recycling. And so the only space that we can put it, we've put everything we can inside the courtyards and on the private spaces and filled that up first, obviously. But we're going to have 750 of these recycling points within the city spaces as well. So some of these decisions that we have to make to get the last CO2 are not popular. We're not making friends removing parking spaces all the time. We're not making friends with all the citizens putting these things up. But they are necessary in the pursuit of a more climate responsible city. And these smaller recycling stations are then supplemented by 28 larger stations across the neighborhoods where you can go and you can swap furniture, clothes, and so on. One of them, I really like this example, is in the new district of the North Harbour. And it's a recycling station that's in the bottom of a parking garage. It's designed by Anders Linear Architects, and it's very nice. You can sort of see where everything is. It's put into these tubes. There's a supermarket, there's the parking garage, and then on top there's this fantastic sports square, public space. But what you can't really see is that this building is actually a huge battery as well. It's collecting the solar power from the entire neighborhood, storing it, and then putting it back into the neighborhood during the night or during the evening when people come home, they start cooking, start putting on the washing machine and everything. So I love this functionality of the quadruple programming of this building. And this has become an icon. I mean, it's been on the cover of every design magazine you can imagine. And when you come to Copenhagen in the airport, it's sort of, right there on all the posters when you land. So the architecture of the city is really actively being used to brand these initiatives and to tell the story both internally to our citizens, but also externally as a marketing tool for our industries that, of course, want to export all of this technology and this knowledge. So, within the building industry, and this is looking a little bit back, like Vienna, like so many European cities, we have experienced a number of great fires. And in Copenhagen, the fires destroyed almost a third of the central city. So following the rebuilds, we had some very strict fire codes for building in wood. Traditionally, all of our homes were sort of wooden constructions and then with a plaster towards the street. And this notion of fire and danger has very much lived with us within our building regulations. So it was very difficult to build in wood, and we really didn't have the wonderful tradition of Austria, Switzerland, or Norway, Sweden, other places that do build a lot. So if you look at the map of Copenhagen, these are all the wooden buildings. And these are the wooden buildings over 3 stories. So you can see that's nothing at all. We don't have the experience, but we know that it is the most sustainable way for us to build, both in terms of the CO2, but also the transportation of the elements into the city, the work environment. So this is really one thing that we are focusing on now. How can we do that? So we have the experience of smaller buildings, like this wonderful little single-family home. But now we need to expand that to larger buildings and even temporary structures like this student housing project. And our first real project will be a new city district of 219,000 square meters, including a public school, a nursing home, all built in wood. And it's really sort of, for us at least, a new architectural language, because most of the wood building is modular. And that makes sense, of course, in terms of a good working environment. You can manage the production, you can stand inside, out, away from the rain. But when I look across my city, there's over 1 million square meters underway of modular wooden homes and buildings. That's a lot. So it is a new technology for us that's being developed, that we are looking and we're striving, we're trying to find out, what does this mean in terms of the architectural language? What does that look like? And one of the reasons that we're doing this is to say the building industry has to follow along. So we're looking at the energy and the mobility, but we all know that the building industry stands for about 30% of the CO2 globally. So what we use in all of our building projects, in the big local area plans, we use a sustainability tool to say across 26 different areas, how can your project be more sustainable? So that's looking both at the social sustainability, but also very much physically, like building in wood, reusing materials much more. And using this as a tool to have a dialogue with everyone who's building in the city. And for our own buildings, we build for about 5 billion kroner a year. That's 800 million euro. All of that is built to the German standard DGNB Gold. That's what we're such a small country, so we've adopted this German standard. And we do this to help with our investment, to get the Danish building industry to get used to using this and to measure, to do the life cycle analysis, and to nudge with our investment the rest of the private sector to follow along. We cannot, according to Danish national law, right now ask for private developers to build to these green standards. So we're using a lot of these nudging techniques to try to push. And one of the other investments we're doing in terms of providing more knowledge is, as mentioned in the introduction, being part of the European Circuit project. And it's a project across these 4 cities, Copenhagen, Hamburg, Helsinki, and Greater London, for a 4-year period, looking at the experiences and the challenges to circular building. So we're collecting experiences from these 4 cities. They will be then fed into, hopefully, EU legislation as well. And that way, the knowledge will filter back into the rest of Europe. And some of the packages that we're looking at. So Copenhagen is the secretariat, so leading this project with the collaboration of the other cities. But we're looking across all of the different challenges we have presently. So how do we understand the resources that are there, the embodied resources of the building materials? And once we have them, how do we mine them? How do we take care of the resources? Where do we put them? And learning experiences then when we build something, this is a demolished concrete building we have, or one of our new schools that's built from a hospital brick that is torn down. How do we use this to develop a new language? And I think, to me, this is a good example. It's a housing building by architect Anders Lenner, and often when I take people to see this, they say, "Oh, it's really ugly. I don't like it." But then I tell them, well, it's because this building, the school, it was the recycled brick are from a hospital wing that was torn down. The hospital wing was from 1870. And at that time, the mortar between the bricks was not very good. So you could just take them apart, clean them, and reuse them. This building is with reused brick from the 1980s. And at that time, the mortar is very, very strong. So it wasn't possible to take that apart. So instead, Anders has sort of cut these facade elements and reused them in a patchwork pattern. Today, we don't allow the mortar to be that strong. But there is this element that maybe sometimes scratches our perception of aesthetic, of tradition. And this is, again, something where the green transition, we have to ask ourselves, what is more important? And I think these demonstration projects, at least to us, are a way of understanding that, the challenges in the building materials, and then feeding that knowledge back into the system. So in terms of another work package, transformation. I mean, understanding the life cycle and the spans of reusing our buildings. This is an old military building turned into actually an architecture office, very nice. Or an old silo building, which is now luxury apartments with a beautiful elevator or restaurant on top now that it's finished. Understanding the inherent values. I was talking to someone earlier today that said, we shouldn't build more as architects. We should just recycle, reuse, rebuild what we already have. I mean, that's something that we're really thinking about and moving into. We're talking also about the flexibility of our building materials. How do we map them? How do we understand the life cycle of them? Either by microchipping, coding, and how do we then begin to use that in terms of new materials? So the sort of dragon scale facade you see on this building is built from old beer bottles, plastic beer bottles. It's a very beautiful facade, actually. And all of that then is said, when we have all these building materials, how do we make systems that make them electronically available and physically available, not only to ourselves, but also to the rest of, is Copenhagen maybe too small? Should we be thinking in the northern region, European scale in terms of making this a reality? That's what we're investigating across these 4 cities. And for our own part, we've been doing small experiments. So we are collecting, every time we change something in the city, we collect all of the outdoor building materials. We're now building a 3,000 square meter story also for indoor building materials. But for the outdoor building materials, like this, that has actually been paid for by our citizens once. It's a fantastic resource. So now when we build new public spaces and renovate streets, we ask the architects to go out and to search, look at what's there. So this is a new space, public space in Nørrebro, one of our sort of very ethnically mixed neighborhoods, where the architects went out and mined. So they registered, they harvested the materials, and that has been the basis of their design. That constraint of these beautiful materials that we already had then becomes the new landscape of the city. And I think for us, I mean, the budget was 5 million, but in terms of putting back these materials, they are worth 5 times as much, these beautiful, beautiful granite boulders. So that's the way we're thinking about our resources. We're doing it already in the outdoor materials, and now we want to move into the indoor materials. So part of the circuit project is to have demonstration projects from different scales. So we have found so far 6 projects, both a school, this is an example of a nursing home that it can't be used anymore, turned into a new public school, but also looking at things that are very difficult, like reusing bathrooms, tiles, sports facilities, bathrooms. How do you do that? Very difficult technically. I think the last point, or last chapter in our climate plan has to do with the blue and the green city. So I was listening earlier to all of the talk about the heat island effect. And fortunately, we have not been as heavily hit by that as Central Europe. But we do have the challenge of water from 3 sides in my city. So rainwater, rising sea level, but also a rising groundwater level. And 10 years ago, we had a big flood in the city. And based on that, we adapted a new stormwater plan. And the stormwater plan spans across the city and has 300 projects, and it's a 20-year implementation plan. 300 projects, and this is really the key investment in terms of transforming all of our streets and all of our public spaces. And so far, we've started, there was a long planning phase, but 11 projects are finished, actually 13 today, and almost 70 started. And I think the interesting financing mechanism for us is that the water company, which is also owned by the city, if we can prove that the value of putting it above ground, handling the water above ground, the water company, and actually everyone who drinks water in Copenhagen pays for it, and it doesn't go out of the municipal budget. So the financing is really the key for us in terms of unlocking these potentials. So we have a system of master plans that go across the entire city and then down into districts, looking at how do we handle the water in the different neighborhoods. And from that then come individual projects and plans. Together with that, we have a set of citywide systems, so looking at new drainage systems that in some ways will completely transform the city, moving from our traditional sidewalk, which you can see on your left, into a new climate sidewalk that has a sort of a deep potential to hold a lot of water. So we're both looking at projects that are sort of citywide, changing the infrastructure, and then we're looking at projects that are more spectacular maybe and more context related. An example could be here, like this. This is by the water, it's by the Royal Playhouse, and it's an old Baroque park in a city district very similar to where we are right now in the Museumskvartier. And this is actually a climate adaptation project. It's a project that in the section can hold a lot of water, but to me it's very respectful to the architecture and to the landscape architecture of the space. So we're trying to say when we build these projects, they should respond to the architectural heritage. They should work with the city in terms of providing these technical solutions, but at the same time provide more beauty and more quality within the city. Another of these examples in a sort of 1930s area where we had sort of a rather run-down park, which has now been transformed to hold 32 million cubic meters of water during rainfalls. And the way it's been done is to lower a lot of the areas that function as skateboard or basket courts when there's no water, and these of course can be filled up. And then around the perimeter of the park is a new wall that can be closed with a gate. And then the entire park can hold a lot of water during the rainfall. So these big investments for us are really changing the face of the city. And the area that we're testing this, we've appointed an area in the city, the Climate Quarter, which is sort of our IBA of water, where we try a lot of different things. And what we found in this area is that we can remove 80% of the asphalt and still have the same number of cars going through, but provide a much greener, a much bluer city neighborhood, which is also much more biodiverse. And mentioning again the urban heat island effect, when we measure this in terms of the temperature, we can see that the surface in this area is 10 degrees lower than in neighboring districts. So these blue and green initiatives have a great deal of impact. And within the Climate Quarter, then we're working with the buildings to say, how can we upgrade them at the same time in the courtyards, but also, and this is a little difficult to see, but this is a new facade on the outside of the existing building where all of the pipes, all of the infrastructure, all the wires have been moved outside, providing better installation for the apartment, moving out the technical installations so that they can be changed more rapidly in the future. So, and then the rainwater runs within that as well. So really trying to think about all of the different elements working together. And as I mentioned, we're not only challenged by the water from above, but also the rising water. And in Copenhagen, being a harbor city, the water level is expected in 100 years to rise 1.20 meters. And so the central city will be almost completely flooded. All of our historic areas, all the areas that are dark blue here are the areas that are potentially flooded. And the reason for that is somewhat self-inflicted, because we have a century-old tradition of filling up the harbor to claim new land for industrial or military purposes. And today we use the same system as a landfill model to pay for the metro and to have new areas for urban development in this growing city. So all of the pink areas on this map have been filled in. So we have to create a solution to this problem that we have created ourselves. And we're looking to nature to do that. So I started showing you this five-finger plan hand. And what we have developed within the last few months is a new plan of a green bracelet that should protect the finger plan. So a series of nature-based solutions all the way around Copenhagen and the neighboring municipalities to protect us from this rising seawater. And just a few images to say, what will this be? We don't know, because it's a 100-year project that over time will be built and be raised more and more to protect this area. And the idea is at the same time to plant a lot of seaweed to provide a underwater forest for the biodiversity. And this idea of creating something around Copenhagen, a bracelet, a protective barrier, is not new. These are some old images. And there's a lot of different site-specific solutions, but what we are discussing right now to the north is to build a new island that will form a sea barrier and provide homes for 35,000 people and workplaces for 35,000 as well. And it's a plan that is scheduled to start construction next year and run for the next 50 years. But while we're doing this, we're all the time trying to see this green and blue transformation. How can that work together? So how can our climate adaptation bring more green into the city? We have, along with this, a strategy of providing green, maximum of 300 meters to a green park from every home. So we're building 6 new parks in the city. We saw that was immensely necessary during COVID, where there was a lot of pressure on our green spaces. So the blue plan goes hand in hand with a green plan and a biodiversity plan. So all in all of these initiatives together form our climate plan. And I'm hopefully sort of the complexity of all of these initiatives together is raising the quality of our city and the quality of life for people there. And architects are very much a part of all of these transformations. They're shaping the city and they're shaping our future. And I hope that you will come and join us in 2023 when Copenhagen is the architecture capital appointed by UNESCO, and come and visit some of these projects and partake in our discussions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Camilla, for this. It was a real wake-up call after a long, long day, and a very inspiring wake-up call. And I think it also, I wouldn't say it summed up, it was for us, it's always stunning that things can really get done. As we said at the beginning, we don't want more blah, 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 as Greta said in Glasgow, but we really have to go into action. And many questions from my side. Maybe the first one to start with, the role of the administration and of the municipality. I think it was very clear today that many things or many measurements we have to take are related with public space, be it the green and blue infrastructure, be it mobility, of course, the most difficult but also the most central one maybe for all of us, but also for new energy systems and. So everything is related to public space. And so it's very clear that the city has to act, that the municipality has to act on a large scale, as we also saw it in Zurich, and that it's not only about small demonstration or pilot projects. And I think that's that's so amazing that you are doing that on such a large scale, like all over the city, but at the same time very precise. So it's really about jumping scale, like talking about profiles of bike lanes and clearing the snow and so on. So it's about details and it's about the big pictures, but it's all about like going beyond the neoliberal city, which we have got very much used to, like, yeah, it will regulate itself, we just have to motivate people, and no, we can't wait. So it's really about political action, it's about public action. Would you?
Well, and I think the direction in Copenhagen has not been, a straight line like this. It's been like this for the last 25 years, or 50 years even, with the bicycle lanes. But regardless of political power, I mean, it's always been in the same direction. And I think there's a total political agreement, not on the details. There's always arguing about, should we move the parking from this street or this street? But the general direction of committing to more green and making those difficult decisions. And that's why for us, this target of carbon neutral by 2025 has been such a guiding light, because everyone has communicated it very strongly, and to all of my colleagues, everyone in the city knows this goal, and we know that we have to live up to it, and we're measured to it, right? So yes, we're doing these grand gestures, but we do a lot of pilots and trial and error. And I showed you, the rather ugly white ones from the city center. They're not beautifully and aesthetically done, but I think we are also seeing that we have to engage with our citizens, because the route to climate change is so difficult that we can't do it alone, only from the top down.
But question of communication, we had that at many points today, and that's also something which is amazing again and again about Copenhagen, and also now in your brilliant presentation. It starts with the imaginary, the way of images, like you always have good photographs, if you see, which is like, if you look at some Viennese presentations, we don't have good photographs very often, especially in other processes. You have icons, like we talked about Otto Neurath. You use it as a tourist strategy, like you enter the airport, or you enter the train station, or you leave the train station. And so, like here in Vienna, tourism is connected to, I don't know, Castle Schönbrunn or something like that, or maybe to Art Deco, but Pferdesierkel, but it's not related to current climate strategy. And I think the symbolic, iconic work has been really important.
I think maybe it's also because we're such a small city and a small country that we need to collaborate. And we are very, it sounds like we're doing everything alone, but we're not, because we're working with the universities and with the business sector, across, we can't do it alone. And in Copenhagen, we're actually poor on land. We own 20% of the land. Most of it is street. So as you say, transforming the streets is extremely important. But some of these green goals, we absolutely have to work together. So if the private market owns 80% of the land, we have an ambition of planting 100,000 trees. We've planted 55,000 so far. And that's really a point where we need everyone to contribute. So we're trying every time we can to make those connections across. So it's not just us. But we have the responsibility as the facilitator of those processes, and setting the direction and being really clear from the political side about that. Yeah.
So it's both, it's legislation, but it's also seduction, the way the symbols you're producing.
It's a little bit of a fairy tale.
Yeah, it is, yes, but in a very clear way. Something that was a little bit an irritation for me was rather at the end of your lecture, when you talked about the problem of landfill and how these landfills have been causing a lot of problems, which are kind of coming up now, and then reacting to these problems again through a big landfill project, which seems a little bit strange, actually.
Yeah, and that's a huge political, I showed you the slide about the housing slide from Vienna. The other political debate is actually related to that. because the model has been extremely successful. So the landfill that we've been doing the last 20 years have financed the new metro, and the metro has been the backbone in providing a more sustainable urban development. We all know that the most sustainable thing is to live in cities, right? Mm-hmm. And for order to do that, we need good public transit. So, should we break this cycle? How do we work with that? That's the big challenge. But you're right, we have created some of our same problems. And the question is then, and that's a political question, do we at some point stop and say, no, we've used all our land, I'm sorry, now you have to move to the suburbs? Or do we build higher? Or how do we handle that?
Or live on boats.
Or live on boats, yes.
I would like to open up the discussion or question and answer. Kurt?
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. At the beginning, you showed this slide of 3 newspapers praising Vienna, and this was very kind. On the other hand, the longer your talk has been, the more humble I got. And I thought we should praise Copenhagen quite a lot, because there are so many things we could partly not even think about and really learn a lot. And I think we should travel to Copenhagen and have a look.
You're very welcome.
For me, it was surprising when you talked about 1.2 million square meters timber construction. So how is your industry? Are they able to deliver? We could not do that at all.
Yeah, I mean, very well, actually, but not alone. So they are working across Europe. So particularly in Eastern Europe, and that's of course, the question, cheap Eastern European labor market is providing this growth for us. But the industry is actually keeping up very well and making this transformation. There's big money in it. But I think the interesting thing is also to understand what is the architectural language, because as technical advancement has happened throughout our industry forever, with the invention of concrete or steel structures, or there's an architecture that follows along, and we're just grasping at what does that mean. We don't have the right answers, but I'm seeing examples in these years. But I do believe, for us at least, it is transformation, recycling, circular materials is one answer, and then building much more in wood for various reasons. So, but we're struggling to find what is our new heritage, what is our new language, because I don't believe we should replicate.
I think that's a really interesting question that we were touching this morning when you couldn't be here. So we had the lecture of Barbara Buser from Basel on recycling and on reuse, not recycling, reuse, and also she talked about form follows availability. Mm-hmm. So first you look what's available, and then you think about what kind of architecture can you do, and this will completely change our architecture. And of course also the question of prefab and the question also what Florian Nagler is doing or experimenting now in Munich about like this kind of low-tech, very pure buildings, and so which looks like, let's say, rather conservative.
Or like this, like very rough, you can see what it is, it's easy to disassemble. Yeah.
And so I think this will be very interesting, how even like Ursula von der Leyen said, like what face will this Green Deal have? And
exactly.
I think
and it's challenging us as a municipality in terms of building codes and permits, because we can't make, a building permit 2 years ahead and know what the facade will be. And that's really difficult when we're used to having that control, to trust the market and trust this development.
And I think maybe it can partly, or it should partly even change the building industry, starting with what Barbara Buser said, like that there are some production companies, be it wood or whatever, who really start to rethink the way how they are dealing with their waste, also reusing it. And as you said, labor conditions, prefab produces completely different labor conditions. And which I think, especially in Vienna, we have been talking about that in conferences before. We have this great tradition of social housing, but we also know that, especially during the last years, the labor conditions, the working conditions in the social housing sector, we have a lot of workers, laborers coming from the East, living under very bad conditions in Vienna, building our social housing estates. So all this is really very difficult.
But I mean, the prefab is difficult because you're limited to the size of a truck. And I do see a struggle with you can make good, very small housing plans within that limitations, but I do see a problem in the flexibility and going around corners or like.
Also the question of the plot, the size, or the shape, the geometry of your
exactly.
plot. Especially if you're talking about transition and not about green meadow developments. I think it becomes much more difficult. But more questions from your side. Not having please.
You have shown that you have a very low quantity of car traffic in your city. How is now the relation between parking spaces in the new development areas and housing areas? Is there a change now, or is it the same like you have had in the past? We know cars are very expensive in Denmark, out of high taxes. Out of them, the cars are smaller. This makes it much easier, but how is this relation between the costs of parking and garages and so on?
Yeah. So I showed initially this map with the development areas, the red areas, and most of them are going to be car-free. So that means no parking requirements, only for services and handicap and so on. And in other parts of the city where they're not, and that's because they are by public transit, so they're part on the metro line, and that's why we say this. We have this requirement: if you're 600 meters from a metro station, you can have a car-free development, which of course, also lowers the price of building. It's immensely expensive to build, particularly if you put them in the ground, which for us is ridiculous when we have rising groundwater, if we put a lot of concrete as well for the parked cars. It's insane. And so it's you can actually do car-free now, but if you're building outside the 600-meter zone from the metro, which is very few places in Copenhagen now, it's one car per 275 square meters. So that's one car per about 4 apartments, 3 to 4 apartments. So quite low. And then the other hand...
That's very different from Vienna.
Yes. And then in the other hand, you have high bicycle parking numbers. But I have visited some great bicycle parking in Vienna, like some of the social housing where you come in.
Yeah. During the last years, it's definitely changing, and especially in social housing or in subsidized housing. Yeah. You have to provide it, definitely, Yeah.
So I think we're doing what we call the carrot and the stick method at the same time. We're trying to provide a carrot, an incentive to do the right thing, but then we're also limiting the access by having these zero car parking areas.
I think it has been a really long day.
Yes.
And thanks a lot to all of you who stayed with us till the end. I feel it has been extremely inspiring. Sorry, I'm also getting tired. To have your keynote tonight, and I think Vienna should really maybe remember again that we have this great tradition of public administration and of public services from the beginning of the 20th century, and actually we should be able to do a big transformation, both from top down and bottom up. I think we have the tradition for that, and maybe we should look back and revive that. Yeah.
Invite everyone here to go into public administration, because that's where I was at a point in my career that I said, like, if I'm going to change things, if I want to be part of a green transformation, I can do that the most if I'm in public administration, because I touch everything.
Yeah.
So go into public administration.
Thanks for that advice and thanks for doing that yourself. I would like to thank again the team from the IBA, Wien, and of course Kurt, and to thank the whole team of the AZW, and especially Caroline Meyer for organizing and conceptualizing the symposium, but the whole team, everyone here on the floor and behind the scenes for your great work, and again to Treats for doing all the technical stuff, and Oliver up there. Thanks to everyone, thanks to the people listening back home in front of the screens, and to everyone here with us. And yeah, have a nice beer and have a nice evening. Bye.